Welcome to the show that teaches you the things your parents and teachers are too afraid to. The Helios blog. Today, Jordan Peterson debates trans issues. Interesting.
The reason she's alone is because she's difficult.
Women are not accepting the bare minimum.
Women fuck men they respect.
All the women who say things like, I'm strong, independent, I don't need no man, like, y'all impress me.
Women just gaslight each other and say what they want to hear.
Just the other day, you were banned from Twitter. Now, I'm somebody, nobody can argue against my lefty credentials. Everybody knows I'm a man of the left.
Disaster.
Having said that, my solution on this issue of social media censorship has always been, look, we need to expand First Amendment protections. And the way you do that is to regulate these big social media companies like they're public utilities. So if you do that, then basically you're saying this is the new public square and people can speak their mind here. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, you can't, dox people or do direct threats of violence or anything that's actually illegal will remain illegal. But outside of that, you can't censor people just based on political opinion. So, I definitely wouldn't have banned you, suspended you, etc. But I do have a question about that specific tweet that did get you in trouble because, you said something to the effect of,
well, I don't know if it got me in trouble. I don't think I'm in trouble. Twitter banned me, but I don't consider that trouble.
That's fair enough. Fair point. But you said something to the effect of, remember when pride was a sin and the criminal physician.
And Ellen Page just had her breasts cut off by a criminal physician.
Exactly. So my question is the physician really criminal? If you agree that adults can decide to transition, then why would the physician be criminal? Don't adults have that right if they want to transition?
Adults, but should we impose it on children is the question.
Not everything legal isn't criminal. And do they have that right? See, I would have left Ellen Page alone if she hadn't been parading her new abs in a fashion magazine. How many kids do you think she can convince to convert? One?
Yeah.
1,000? No, not
See,
yeah.
No,
really?
I want to respond to that. I think that with the trans community, it's very similar to the gay community where back when that first became a big issue, people thought, oh, if we talk about it, if it's in magazines or whatever, we're promoting kids to go down that path. But really what happened is...
That is what happened. Okay.
People are who they are. And if they're gay, they just decided to be like, yeah, I'm gay. And they were just more open and honest with themselves. So I don't think you're promoting people to do that.
No,
you're
that's
just
not
saying,
what happened.
if you
You're
are that, it's okay.
wrong.
Okay. Well,
you're utterly
I'm
wrong.
listening.
There's
I'm
nothing
listening.
about that that's right.
So explain.
Well, there's been an absolute... Look, one of the reasons that I opposed Bill C-16 in Canada to begin with, this pronoun compelled speech bill, was because I knew perfectly well what was going to happen when we introduced confusion about gender identity into the public sphere. Now, the argument was that if we left people with gender dysphoria alone to make their own way and stop torturing them, that we would decrease the mental health load on those individuals. And my analysis as a clinician was that for every one person of that sort that we hypothetically saved, we doom 1,000 more as a consequence of confusion and social contagion. I knew the literature on psychogenic epidemics. They used to call that mass hysteria, and it's a literature that goes back about 300 years. And often when you introduce social confusion, you can produce a psychogenic epidemic, especially generally it's adolescent females who are most susceptible to it. So I thought, what's going to happen is we'll produce a psychogenic epidemic of gender dysphoria among adolescent females. And that is exactly what's happened. And it isn't the fact that we've freed up people who are in doubt about their identity to be who they are. That may have happened in a tiny minority of cases. It's absolutely and definitely the case that we've doomed thousands of kids to brutal, mutilating surgery and premature sterility. And we've done that on the altar of our hypothetical moral virtue and compassion.
Ouch. You don't want to be debating Jordan on this.
Look, I read a corporate analysis of the trans surgery industry last week. Growth rate projection for you lefty types and your anti-corporatism. Growth rate projection, 15% per year. Invest now. A $350 million business as of 2022, projected to expand to $750 million by 2027. No moral hazard there? There's plenty of moral hazard there. And that surgery is absolutely brutal.
So what percentage of the population do you think, in your conception of how this is unfolding, what percentage of the population do you think is going to end up being trans at the end of this? Do you think like one day it's going to be like 70% of the country is trans?
Well, we know already that about 1 in 5 adolescents now identifies, to use that hated word, identifies as part of the hypothetical LGBTQ plus community.
Uh-oh.
So it's 1 in 5. I don't know what the upper limit is. There's a consulting group in the UK now that's claiming there's 150 different genders. There's actually, I suppose, 7 billion different genders, if you want to get technical about it, because everybody's temperament differs. But I don't know what the upper limit is. And I have no idea what the upper limit is for this surgical intervention. We'll see. But I don't find it, I don't find it the least bit acceptable. And if you think that your compassion is demanding that you extend your pity to the LGBTQ plus community at the cost of sterilizing children, you should think again. You're on the wrong side of this, and not in a trivial way.
I would appreciate if you don't ascribe beliefs to me that I don't have. Remember, my original question was about...
Well, you said earlier in question that,
I said
that you
Elliot
were...
Page is an adult, and so do you think that he has the right to transition?
But
that was the original question.
You made some comments after that. Yeah, but as a star and a public figure and a model for emulation, she also has the responsibility not to entice confused adolescents into a catastrophic decision before they have the maturity to make that decision.
I just have to say, Jordan, I think it's a little bit of a moral panic. I just don't see some sort of, frenzy.
What could be the harm?
Okay, what would you consider
to become trans?
What? First of all, that's a hell of a way to put it.
Why
don't you take a look at the increase in surgical interventions and see what you think? I mean, how many do you think is too many?
Again,
if we're talking about
I'll
suffering,
answer your question. The argument is it used to be very repressed because that's very outside of the tradition and the norm and the standard, and that now when you sort of let the boot off the neck a little bit.
What used to be suppressed?
The entire LGBTQ community. I mean, it was very recently we even got gay marriage in the United States.
First of all, they're not a community.
Well, you understand the point I'm making.
No, actually, neither I understand it nor you, and that's why we're delving into it. First of all, they're not a community.
Condescending laugh noted.
That's just a catchphrase. It's a buzzword. And I'll tell you something else, that almost all the kids who are undergoing surgical intervention, the clinical literature is absolutely clear on this. 80% of kids with gender dysphoria identify as homosexual when they mature. 80%. And that means the vast majority of people who are being converted surgically are gay. Now, how is that an advantage to the gay community precisely?
No, see, I'm not taking a position in any way, shape, or form on the kids, because I don't know the first thing about this to comment on the kids. Well, but see, that's why we're having this conversation, though, is because my original question was about the adults and what your take is on the adults. And it sounds to me like, let me ask you guys, would you ban transition surgery for adults?
I don't know.
Really?
Yeah, really. We're paying a big price for it. And I think that it was an act of stunning hubris to conduct the first trans surgery procedure. And it's not obvious to me at all that it's been a net social good.
But aren't there some people that are obviously trans who were born in one body, they feel like they're in the other body, and when they're an adult, they can make the decision? And then even from just a freedom and liberty perspective, shouldn't they have that right? Even if they do it and then they regret it, shouldn't they have the right to try it?
It's a good question. I mean, it's a tricky one, right? Because there's all sorts of surgical enhancement procedures that are it's not obviously appropriate to make them illegal. And I don't know exactly where the cutoff line is, so to speak. And that's partly why we're having a public discussion about it. But this entire argument, in many ways, is stated so idiotically that it almost defies description. I mean, what do you mean feel like you're in the wrong body? What kind of measurement is that? Now, hang on a sec.
I was going to
There
answer.
are rules for these sorts of diagnostic decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The rule is that you have to make a valid and reliable diagnosis. That's if you're diagnosing depression or anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder or cancer or anything like that. There are standards that you have to abide by in order to make a diagnosis, in order to fulfill the obligations of your professional college. If someone comes to you and says, I feel like I have lung cancer, that is not sufficient grounds upon which to formulate a diagnosis, much less proceed to surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is...
No, but if you don't do it, you're a bigot. You don't understand, Jordan.
What do you mean by feel? What is that? Is that an emotion? Is it a motivation? Is it a philosophical conclusion? What is it?
Let me explain to you what I mean. So I've been doing my show for about a decade. And about 2 or 3 years into doing my show, there were, some stories here and there that I covered about the trans issue. Somebody who is trans reached out to me and explained to me in a very straightforward way, yeah, look, I was born biologically female. I feel like I'm biologically male. My reality never lined up. Well, I'm just explaining what they said, and then you can respond however you'd like to respond. And they told me as soon as I got the surgery, changed the way I dressed, changed the way I appeared, I felt phenomenally better. And so that's why, at least for me, this was the answer.
That's an anecdotal, right? You can't generalize the population using one example.
Now, I think it would be incredibly arrogant for me to say back to that person, no, you shouldn't do that, or I know better than you do for yourself. Now, that's not to say that every time somebody does this, it works out well, of course, because everybody's an individual. But in some instances, that's the answer. So, me as a simple outsider, I just look at it and say, hey, whatever floats your boat, and if it works, it works.
Look, most of the time, my attitude is you can go to hell in handbasket any way you choose if you're an adult. Now, this problem is complicated and compounded by the fact of the necessity of medical involvement and the ethics on the medical front. So when you asked me about how that should be regulated, my answer was, I'm not exactly sure about that.
Yeah,
although it isn't obvious to me it's obvious to me that the trans surgery enterprise has gone way too far, thousands of people too far. And I'm certain that it's harmed exponentially more people than it's helped.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country.
Okay. Let's continue.
I want to know, what is your answer to young people for some of the really big problems facing humanity, like the climate catastrophe, like economic crisis, like the precarious job market? Because they just don't, you talk all this much about individual responsibility. Most of us are never going to be able to afford to have all of these assets to have responsibility over. So what is your advice beyond banal comments like clean your room?
Well, it's actually rather difficult to answer a question that ends with your comments are banal politely. So, I would consider that more of an opinionated personal and political statement than actually a question. So why don't you try reformulating that so that there's an actual question there?
What is your... So what is your advice to young people when you talk about you need to be individually responsible, but when there are things that are so far out of our control, like climate catastrophe, like the precarious job economy, like the economic crisis,
out of your control as you think.
What is your answer to
Do you think that you're worse off than
you
think that you're worse off than your grandparents?
I think there are different challenges.
Do you think you're worse off than your grandparents?
I think that...
Jordan, once again, we're not going to cross-examine our questioners. So try answering the question about collective responsibility on climate change, for example. Pick one part of that, because the argument, I think, is that individual responsibility does not change the climate, does not fix the problem that needs global collective responsibility.
But in fact, it does, because societies are made up of groups of individuals.
I think that's the core of the question.
digress.
Do you have a theory about that?
Well, fundamentally, I'm a psychologist, and my experience has been that people can do a tremendous amount of good for themselves and for the people who are immediately around them by looking to their own inadequacies and their own flaws and the things that they're not doing in their lives and starting to build themselves up as more powerful individuals. And if they're capable of doing that, and then they're capable of expanding their career. And if they're capable of expanding their career and their competence, then they're capable of taking their place in the community as effective leaders. And then they're capable of making wise decisions instead of unwise decisions when it comes to making collective political decisions. I'm not suggesting in the least, and have never suggested, that there's no domain for social action. I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world, which happens in many ways.
So, can I just to, if a young person believes that the climate, the global warming problem on the climate is something that needs to be tackled quickly, and they can't wait until they grow up and become prime ministers to do it, do you think collective responsibility overrides individual responsibility in a huge issue like that?
No.
Okay.
I don't. Okay. I think that generally people have things that are more within their personal purview that are more difficult to deal with and that they're avoiding, and that generally the way they avoid them is by adopting pseudo-moralistic stances on large-scale social issues.
Very nice. Yes, Jordan. Very, very nice.
So that they look good to their friends and their neighbors. That's what it looks like.
Yup. Got him.
Both in terms of human conditions.
I don't believe any of those presumptions. I think
but then
both
if you
faulty.
don't, but I mean, like, obviously, if I agreed with that factual analysis, I would probably agree with you on the prescription here too, right?
Sorry, let's go back a bit. We're going back a
models
bit.
that purport to explain what's going to happen over a century on the climate side, but we have economic models layered right on top of those that claim that there's going to be various forms of disaster for human beings economically as a consequence of that climate change. And so that's like two towers of Babel stacked on top of one another. And so, because if people were just saying, oh, the climate's going to change, there'd be no moral impetus in that. It's the climate's going to change and that's going to be disastrous for the biosphere and for humanity. But that's an economic argument as well as a climate-based argument.
It's both, but the worst projections of what would happen if the climate took a disastrous turn are worse than the worst projections of what is our planet going to look like economically if we hardcore police,
right.
Fossil.
Why would you? Okay, but I don't understand the distinction between the models.
Well, the argument would be that whatever pain and suffering poor people might endure right now because of a move towards green energy, that pain and suffering is going to be short-term and far less than the long-term pain and suffering.
Right, but that's dependent on the integrity of the economic models and the
climate models as well, right?
Exactly,
course,
but in exactly the stacked manner that I described. And like, there's nobody in 1890 who could have predicted what was going to happen in 1990 economically. Not a bit. And if we think we can predict like 50 years out now with the current rate of technology and calculate the potential impact of climate change on economic flourishing for human beings, we're deluded. No one can do that. And then, it's worse. So imagine that as you do that and you project outward, your margin of error increases. That's absolutely, definitely the case. And at some point, certainly on the climate side, the margin of error gets rapidly to the point where it subsumes any estimate of the degree to which the climate is going to transform. And that happens even more rapidly on the economic side.
Potentially, but right now, this is a disagreement on the fact of the matter, though, not the philosophy of what we're talking about in terms of controlling externalities. If we think, I'm curious, let's say that we think we can accurately predict the climate and the economic impact, and we think that the climate impact would be far worse if we don't account for that, both in terms of human conditions.
I don't believe any of those presumptions.
But then if you don't, but I mean, like, obviously, if I agreed with that factual analysis, I would probably agree with you on the prescription here too, right? If I thought that like none of the climate models were accurate or couldn't accurately predict anything, then I'd also say why make.
Well, they're not sufficiently accurate That's the first thing. And because they have a margin of error, and it's a large margin of error, they don't even model cloud coverage well. That's a big problem. They don't have the resolution. They don't have nearly the resolution to produce the accuracy that's claimed by the climate apocalypse mongers.
People
Not even
keep saying
close.
that, but we just got another one of the hottest years on record. How
Okay, but again, like, honestly, okay, guys, in the comments, you tell me if I'm an idiot, okay? Didn't the world have, like, a Jurassic period, a Cretaceous period, you know, periods where there was literally, I think there was literally zero snow on the entire planet. There was no ice, no snow. Global rainforest. Why exactly would that be bad for humanity, considering our capacity for adaptability? And with regards to animals dying en masse, you know, like wildlife, well, we do have ability to transfer animals around and so on, and to artificially select for plants and animals. So, I mean, it would be a global collapse of multiple biospheres, but aside from the short-term upheaval, wouldn't we be able to survive a long-term upheaval? Like, and with actual positive consequences, because the world is a global rainforest. So, I mean, perhaps not on the parasites and bacteria front, but global habitability would go up, right? And with regards to water, it's not like that water disappears, that water evaporates into the oceans. Like, again, I fail to see how it could be so catastrophic. I mean, humans are very ingenious. Like, if we survived an ice age, why couldn't we survive the opposite of an ice age, a melt age? Why couldn't we survive it? I'm failing. Perhaps I'm not as smart as you guys in the comments. Please explain to me why it actually would be so bad. Okay.
How many times are we going to have another hottest year on record? How many times are we going to have an increase of carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere before we're finally like, okay.
I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because it depends. The scientific answer to that question depends precisely on the time frame over which you evaluate the climate fluctuation. And that's actually an intractable scientific problem. So you might say, well, if you take the last 100 years, this variation looks pretty dismal. And I'd say, well, what if you took the last 150,000 years? Or the last 10,000, or the last 10 million. You can't specify the damn time frame of analysis.
The time frame is incredibly important. That would be like saying, look at your, let's say somebody developed cancer and they didn't realize it, and the person has lost, 40 or 50 pounds in the past 6 months. And I'm just like, you look very sickly. And you're like, okay, well, look at my weight fluctuation over the past 10 years. You say, well, that doesn't really matter. What matters
I'm
is the
not
fact
saying
that
the time frame isn't important.
Well, but I'm saying
that it is important.
Yeah,
I'm saying I don't know how to specify it.
Well, you would probably specify it with the beginning of the industrial age, right?
Why?
Because that's when carbon dioxide, which is a gas that's seen as trapping more heat on the planet.
Why is that relevant to the time over which you compute the variability?
Because it seems like as carbon dioxide has increased in the atmosphere, the surface temperatures have risen at a rate that is a departure from what we'd expect over 150,000 year cycles of temperature variations on the planet.
No, not with that time frame. That's
absolutely.
Just not the case.
It's absolutely the case.
No, what do you mean? You just flipped to 150,000 year time span.
What I'm saying is that if we expect to see a temperature do this in a 150,000 year time span, in a 100 years time span, seeing it do this, that's very worrying. Now,
you mean like Michael Mann's hockey stick, the one that's under attack right now in court by a major statistician who claimed that he falsified his data? I mean, that spike?
I'm talking about the record temperatures that have been declared for like the past 5 years that have also increased with the concentration of parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that every model is perfect.
They're not
right
perfect.
Now, sure, but right now we're like standing in traffic with our eyes closed saying the car hasn't hit me yet, so I don't think there's any coming. I think it's pretty undeniable at this point that there is an impact on climate across the planet. I think
that's highly deniable. We have no idea what the impact is from. We don't know where the carbon dioxide is from. We can't measure the warming of the oceans. We have terrible temperature records going back 100 years. Almost all the terrestrial temperature detection sites were first put outside urban areas, and then
And then
you have to correct. Then you have to correct for the movement of the urban areas, and then you introduce an error parameter that's larger than the purported increase in temperature that you're planning to measure. This isn't data. This is guess, and there's something weird underneath it. There's something weird that isn't oriented well towards human beings underneath it. It has this guise of compassion. Oh, we're going to save the poor in the future. It's like that's what the bloody communists said. And they killed a lot of people doing it. And we're walking down that same road now with this insistence that, we're so compassionate that we care about the poor 100 years from now. And if we have to wipe out several 100 million of them now, well, that's a small price to pay for the future utopia. And we've heard that sort of thing before. And the alternative to that is to stop having global level elites plot out a utopian future or even an anti-dystopian future. And that's exactly what's happening now with organizations like the WEF. And if this wasn't immediately impacting the poor in a devastating manner, I wouldn't care about it that much, but it is. I watched over the course of the last 5 years, the estimates of the number of people who were in serious danger of food privation rise from about 100 million to about 350 million. That's a major price to pay for a little bit of, what would you say, for progress on the climate front that's so narrow it can't even be measured.
I don't think the increase in hungry people on the planet is because of climate policies.
Why not?
Okay, well, there it is. Let's end the video there. Hit the like, hit the sub, hit all for notifications, drop me a donation. Like Hunter M, Adrian R, Tom and Bobby, Dylan, Russell, Press, Brian, Andrew, and Alan. Shout out to you. Most recent purchase of Strategist Guide to Seduction. Go buy my books at bit.ly/heliosbooks. Want to see my videos ahead of time in like batches of 4 or 5? Sure, I offer early access on my Patreon. That's patreon.com/theheliosblog. Want me to give you better advice than Destiny? Well, just message me at theheliosblog@gmail.com. I do offer coaching services. Thank you so much for listening, guys, especially if you listen to the end. Really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.